The great thing about this business and about this industry, as much as we love the cattle and the product, is the people. At the end of the day, it's the people. It's an honor, a blessing, and a privilege for me to introduce my friend, Tom Brink. As many of you know, Tom served CattleFax as a market analyst. Then he departed there for Five Rivers cattle feeding, and then from there to take the entrepreneurial step and launch his own business, Top Dollar Angus. Tom started noticing a few years ago the advancements that Angus cattle were making and the positive impacts these advancements, innovations, were having on feed yard and packer bottom lines. He's a guy who gets opportunity and doing something about it. He saw an opportunity. He's building a business because of it. Please help me welcome a champion for you and for your breed, Tom Brink.
Where's the clicker?
Right up on top.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Tom. And how's that mic working out okay? Thank you for being here this afternoon, and thank you for inviting a cattle feeder to be here. I look at what I'm doing now in this business. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that, but this is really, I think this whole talk that I'm going to offer this afternoon is external validation to a lot of the work that you all have been engaged in for many years. And I love what Tom said. He said, you know what we need to figure out in this country and not forget is to let free enterprise run. That is what drives our economy, that's what drives our business, and that's what I'm going to talk about, as well as a little bit about my program and how it might affect you. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about innovation, entrepreneurship, and how it fits really into all of our businesses. Because whether you think about yourself as an innovator or not, it can absolutely play a role in your operation. And I want to try to put some perspective on that this afternoon, and hopefully you'll see that it does apply to what you're doing. There's a great quote. It's an older book, comes out of an older book written by George Gilder. Ronald Reagan loved his book. It was written in the late 70s. Originally, he's kind of got a new version now. And George, it's on wealth and poverty. It's on entrepreneurialism. It's on creating new products and new services when you don't know if somebody's going to buy them or not, and the risk that the entrepreneurs take. But he has this quote. He says, the combination of research and enterprise are the supreme source of productivity and wealth. And if you want to read a good book, grab the book Wealth and Poverty by George Gilder. It's an excellent read. And again, Ronald Reagan quoted more times out of that book than any other economic book that he used. It's true, it's true, because what does research produce? It kind of starts there. Maybe you don't think about what you do in your operation as being research if you're testing something new, but really it is. Because research produces what? It produces knowledge. And knowledge plus enterprise, plus applying what we know, what we think we can do with this knowledge, that produces new technology. And sometimes it is high tech, right? Other times it's just new approaches or new relationships. In our industry especially, we suffer a lot from not having the relationships between the segments of the business in our supply chain. And so new technology may not always be something that we would consider to be a computerized chip or some other type of a new drug. It may be a relationship, a new approach, a new partnership in the way that we're bringing cattle through the system. But we do know that whatever you call it, new technology is what creates opportunity. It creates opportunity to get better, more efficient, more productive, more profitable, and more prosperous. I tried to think over the last couple of decades. I was sitting down putting this talk together the other day, and I thought, I can name many, many companies, a lot of them in this room, that have had a huge impact on our business, on the cattle business in the last decade, too, some of them a little longer than that. Maybe they're just really bearing fruit now. Take a look at that slide. And some of those pictures are just to represent the industry, or there's other companies that are doing something similar. But you think about where we were 20 years ago when many of those companies that are doing what they're doing and bringing their products to our business weren't so big, weren't so active. Maybe their products weren't being used so much. And think about how much we're being impacted by that today. I would venture to say that everybody in this room is using a good portion of the new technology, the new services that you see on this page. And it really wasn't that long ago. The big point to think about here, it really wasn't that long ago when we didn't have these products, we didn't have these companies. But today we recognize that they've had a big impact on our business. They really have. And it's tremendous. We're making great strides forward. It's impacted the Angus breed. The Angus breed has been part of it as well. Making great strides forward in the business because of new services and new opportunities they've created. You know, not long ago, I guess it was in August, I was taking my son to college, and he's going to a school west of Boise, Idaho, and I drove by this sign. And I thought, how many corn plots have we all seen over the years? Hundreds of them, right? If you live in the Midwest, you drive by them every summer day. And even other parts of the country. This was, of course, in the Northwest. And I thought, what a great name. What a great name that they put on this sign. It didn't say research plots. It said what we're trying to create, and that's knowledge plots. And I would argue that the impact of all these knowledge plots over the years in our industry is something that we are tremendously benefiting from today. Now here's a slide that gives us some perspective here. This is nearly a chart that shows nearly 150 years of corn yields in the United States. It goes clear back to the 1870s. And you'll notice, if you look at this chart, the first 75 years, we didn't do a whole lot. My mom was born, my dad was born about at that inflection point in the early 1930s. And what happened during their lifetime has been incredible. So the last 75 or so years, look at what we've done to national average corn yields. And as I was driving through, I was up in Nebraska yesterday and coming down to here, I saw a lot of farmers in the field. I saw a lot of corn picking going on, and I almost wanted to stand and salute and shake their hand and say thank you, because what they're doing is benefiting all of us in the cattle business. And because this has happened, because of that yield curve that you see and all the knowledge created that it took to get that done, we now have abundant corn supplies. We have had that for a number of years. And we also have something else that I think we all appreciate, and that's calves that are worth way over $2 a pound. I remember a couple years ago, and it's not because I had a perfect crystal ball, I started telling people, I said, if you like selling calves with a 100 in front of the price, you're going to like the 200s even better. We're well up into the 200s. The Cattle Facts average price last week for a 550 weight calf, this is U.S. average, was $2.78 a pound. That could not have happened without that without the corn chart I just showed you. And we wouldn't have the cattle feeding industry that we have either without that corn chart that we looked at. And without the feeding industry, we wouldn't have high quality beef, and we wouldn't have the demand for our product that we have. So it all fits together, and that entrepreneurship and that innovation and that drive to learn and create new knowledge about how to grow corn better has impacted all of us in this room. So I want to kind of make this a little bit personal and try to apply this maybe some to your operation this afternoon. And I got to thinking about this, and I thought, in our businesses, in the cattle business, no matter if you're a seed stock producer, if you're a commercial producer in the room, you're a cattle feeder, more of a stocker operator, your business practices on a daily basis probably can be broken down into three categories, three types of business practices. Those that are innovative, those innovative practices, those that are conventional, and those that are, we'll call them traditional. And let's define those a little bit. Innovation, start at the top. Innovation is doing things that, in a way, they might work, they could work, but we don't know for sure. We don't know for sure because we're trying something new. We're experimenting. So that's an innovative practice, right? Convention is probably most of what we do in our operations on a day-to-day. Conventional practices. Those are things that do work today, and we pretty well know they work. We're familiar with them. We understand they're going to help our business move forward, and so those we're going to call conventional practices. And then there's, at the bottom line there's those traditional practices. Practices that we maybe inherited from a previous generation, or maybe we've just been doing them so long they become an automatic part of what we do every day. But the question there, of course, is we're really doing something that used to work or it did work. And maybe we don't know for sure how effective it is today. I think every business practice, no matter your type of business, and even for those in the trade show behind us, you can look at what you're doing today and on a daily basis, and you can say they're either an innovative practice, a conventional practice, or maybe it's something that I'm doing just because of tradition, and I'm not as sure that it works like it used to. There's risk on both ends, isn't there? There's risk on both ends. Because with innovation, of course, we're not sure exactly how it's going to turn out. We're experimenting, we're trying something new, we have maybe a good idea that it can impact our business, it can take us forward, but we're not sure. There's risk involved, and we got to take a chance to become involved in innovation of any kind, especially in our own businesses, right? And tradition. Tradition also, we may not think about this, but tradition also carries risk because what used to work may not be working so well. And if that practice gets mixed in with everything else we're doing, we may not even realize it, that we're being impacted by those traditional things that we do in our businesses that really aren't helping us anymore. Now we can go and we can apply this to the cattle business, and we could spend a lot of time on this. I think it's worth at least looking at a few different possibilities. Now let's look at these two examples that I show on your screen. Which one is the traditional practice? Which one is maybe now a conventional practice, but at one time it was actually innovative? How many of you, like me, that slide on the left-hand side, spent a lot of time in your younger years filling hay barns with little square bales? Okay, quite a few hands in the room. How many of you are still doing that today, or your family members are still doing that today? A few, and maybe you have some business that you're selling grass hay in small square bales to horse people or something. But there's an example of a traditional practice changing over to a different way of doing things, and of course it's dramatically changed in the last 25 or 30 years. Here's another one, right? Rotational versus continuous grazing. How many in the room are involved in rotational grazing of some sort? And there's a lot of different kinds. Okay, a goodly number of hands, okay? That was a new practice, right? A couple decades ago, we really learned that we can get a lot more production out of our land. It's better for the grass, it's better for the livestock with rotational grazing versus continuous grazing. I grew up on an operation where, like most of you probably, continuous grazing is really all we did. We didn't really know different at that period of time. So there's some other examples of traditional practices and thinking about the innovation that became convention in our business. Let's look at a few others. How about preg testing? What would you call that? I think it's become a conventional practice. At one point, innovation, but now it's convention. AI and embryo transfer. The Angus breed leads the industry in the use of AI. What is it? Over 50% of your registered calf crop every year is produced from AI, and it's maybe close to 60% with embryo transfer or something like that. So it's almost convention. I would say it is convention in the Angus breed. How about fetal sexing? That would be something a little newer, wouldn't it? Maybe an innovative practice. If you're selling bred heifers or cows and you have ultrasounded and you're selling those cows with a known sex of calf, that's fairly innovative. That's pretty new. That's offering some new value to your customer, of course, because now they can pick the sex of calves that they're going to get as they purchase different females from your operation. VAC 45 programs as a cattle feeder, that's pretty close to my heart. We've done a lot in this industry over the last probably 20 years working on vac programs, getting calves weaned and vaccinated, so they'll do what? So they'll stay healthy in the feed yard. So they'll stay healthy. That's become, I wish it was convention. I can't say for everybody in the industry it's convention because we're not quite there yet. DNA testing, fairly new, fairly new. How about this one? This was the easy one, so even if you're dozing off out there, you should get this one right. How about the practice of selling non-castrate commercial bull calves? Traditional practice, right? Traditional practice. Used to be a standard practice, but now, if that's what you're doing as a commercial producer, you're leaving a lot of opportunity and a lot of value on the table for sure. Marketing assistance for customers, and this one, of course, targeted at the seed stock folks in the room. It should, of course, be a lot of you. Are you providing marketing assistance to your customers? That's a fairly innovative practice, fairly new. Not that many people engaged in it in a real ongoing fashion, you might say. Something that might be viewed as innovative. And then how about active selection for carcass traits? Thinking about something beyond your ranch, your customer's ranch, their cow herd, and thinking about the whole supply chain. So again, we can look at different practices that we're engaged in our operation. We could probably classify those the way we've talked about as either being innovative, conventional practices, or traditional practices. Now I want to throw this at you, and this may push you just a little bit this afternoon, okay? Mindsets can be bound by tradition too. Mindsets sometimes get bogged down in tradition, things that used to work, but maybe we're not so sure they're going to work today. How about that first one? Continental cattle perform better than Angus in the feed yard. If anybody in the room thinks that, that's about 20 years too old, because it is not true today. Maybe 25 or 30 years old. Might have been true at one time, probably was, but no more because of the genetic work that many of you in this room have done. Low birth weight cattle can't be growth cattle. You guys in the Angus breed wrote the book on that. You changed that. There was a time when that mindset was absolutely entrenched in our industry. And I remember about the time I was in college, we talked about that. We said, if we're going to have true growth cattle, and we needed more growth in our cattle at that time, 30 years ago or so, and we said, we're going to have to tolerate a little more birth weight. But you proved us wrong on that. You proved with the right data, with the right selection, we can have lower birth weight cattle that will grow better than anything we've ever seen. How about the third one? This one ought to make you smile. Dehorning is really not that much work. Okay, who in the industry still thinks that out there? There's probably some that do. They have convinced themselves that, it's not that big of a deal. It stresses the animals a little bit, and I have to have some help to get it done, but really it's not that much work. That would be, in my mind, very much a traditional thinking that is way past its day. EPDs do not work. EPDs do not work. Heard that before? Yeah, we've heard that since the middle to late 80s. And yet, they do work, and so we keep using them and building on them. And so forth. I won't go through all of these, but you can't have maternal cattle and carcass cattle. I think that's the next one that the Angus breed, if you haven't already debunked that, I think you're in the process of debunking that now. And what you're going to offer to the industry in the years ahead are going to be even better maternal cattle and even better carcass cattle at the same time. Why? Because you have the information to get that done, and you're doing it. And those that might stand on the outside and throw rocks, they'll bounce right off the people inside the circle that are making it happen. So that's becoming more of a traditional old thought that isn't valid, I think, every passing year. To keep costs down, we can starve a profit out of our cows. I think in this industry, I think we've learned that that's not the way. That's not the way. How would you like to have an extremely low input, low productive cow herd when calves are worth almost $3 a pound? That's not going to work as well as what some of the rest of us have. And I'm not saying we need high input cows either, but you get the point. You get the point. How about this one? Again, as a cattle feeder, that bottom one, that one I can relate to pretty well. I don't care about my calves, my commercial calves, once they leave the ranch or the farm. I'll let somebody else, I'll let the cattle feeder worry about that. What kind of thinking is that? Well, that's sometimes the kind of thinking that results in this slide right here. And I would like to ask you this afternoon, does anybody want to have some ownership of cattle in the feed yard that do this? Okay, look at those numbers, okay? And these cattle have been on feed less than 40 days. And where are we? Where are we? And yes, I confess I own a portion of these cattle right here, and I'm kind of getting nervous about it. I'm calling the feed yard manager every Friday and saying, give me the update, although after what I got last week, I don't think I'm going to call him again. I don't know if I want to know, but this is what happens sometimes when we don't think about the whole supply chain. We don't think about what happens when those calves leave the farm or leave the ranch. And if your customers as a seed stock producer, believe me, this reaches all the way back to you, okay? Will the feed yard that bought these cattle, will I that bought a portion of these cattle not think twice before I buy these cattle next year? Will it affect how I bid on those cattle next year because of the experience we had? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so there's the impact right there, and it could reach clear back. It could reach clear back. There's no question about that. I guess that's what I get for buying unweaned calves to begin with. So circle the two. If you're following with me on this thought process, then circle the two practices out of three here that best fit your operation. Would you say, as you look at these three choices, that your operation would lean this way? Maybe that most, if not all, of the practices that you're engaged in your operation are conventional practices and traditional practices? Is that really what characterizes your business? Or would you say you lean a little more this direction, that you're innovative, you're trying new things, you're learning, you're experimenting, maybe you're taking some calculated risks, and you're applying what you've learned to the operation to make it better and to take it into the future, Now, there's no hard science behind any of this, but I thought, as I think about where probably a lot of us should be in our businesses, we maybe should have a distribution that looks something like this. 20% is experimentation or innovation. We're trying some things new. Obviously, the bulk of it should be things that work today, that we know work today. They're going to keep our operation profitable. We're using the technology that's proven. We're using the practices that have been proven. But a smaller portion of that being traditional practices that we're maybe not as sure we just done because of history or because of previous generations. We're not as confident it's still contributing today. So that's just my thought offered to you as a way to think about your operation and what you're doing, because you absolutely can, as we said, be an innovator in your cattle business, in your own cattle business today. It's not just reserved for people that are trying absolutely new things and creating new businesses from scratch. I also believe this very strongly, okay? Part of being a genetics supplier or a genetic user in the cow-calf business where you're creating commercial calves for the industry, part of being an innovator is thinking beyond the ranch gate. That's pretty simple. It's not a new thought, but we still have many, many people in our industry that don't do that. They just don't do that. So part of being an innovator, I believe, is thinking beyond just my segment of the supply chain, but thinking about all of the beef business as a whole. And that brings us to this topic, which is also part of what I wanted to discuss with you this afternoon, and that is why quality matters. Why does quality matter? Well, because we don't compete that well on price. And I don't think any of you want us to start competing on price. This is a graph of wholesale prices for pork, chicken, and then some different categories of beef last week. Okay? I guess I've turned pork and chicken into the other blue meat there. So you can see the difference there. We're selling our product up here. Pork and chicken are right around at the wholesale level $1 a pound. By the way, if anybody tells you beef people need to compete more on price, just tell them we're happy selling at the prices we are. Because if we're going to go compete on price, we could do that. We just have to cut all of our prices, including the prices of your bulls and your commercial calves. We'd have to take whatever those numbers are and take them by about 0.4. Multiply them by about 0.4, and that's where we'd be. And I don't think any of us want to do that. We don't compete on price. We compete on quality and taste. That's really why we are where we are in this industry. I was talking to a pork guy the other day. He's a pork genetics guy, and he shared these numbers with me. He said, you know, industry average, number of market hogs produced per sow per year, industry average in that business is about 7,000 pounds or a little less. And he was telling me about an operation in Nebraska that's over 9,000 pounds. Okay, they're using elite genetics. They're using very high-end genetics. And look what they're getting done. They're at over 9,000 pounds per sow per year, per 500-pound sow per year. They're getting that done. That's about 25%, if you can believe it, above industry average. And those genetics are already out there today. It's just a matter of adoption across more of the industry. It's tough for us to compete on that, and we're not going to compete like that on a price and pounds basis. Here's where our opportunity is, though, right here. If you look at what grid premiums, what drives grid premiums, it's right there, boxed in red in what you see in this slide. It's the high end. It's the high-end value that really drives our system. It's the CABs and the primes that you can get a significant premium on as you're selling on an industry grid, and we're selling about 70% of our cattle on industry grids now. If you look at the very, very high value cattle, and this data comes from a study that I'm working on looking at cattle that earned $100 per head or more on the grid. What you see is I've got average cattle in the left-hand column. These are choice and prime percentages. So the average cattle you see on the left, somewhere around 68% choice and prime, with about 4 to 5% of that being prime. Then look to the right and see the two groups of cattle that earn substantial premiums on the grid, $100 plus. What did they do? They were replete with quality. They graded extremely well, and it drove value to way up over $100 head premium. And here's another slide that shows basically the same thing. And what it shows, if you look at the difference between high-value cattle and low-value cattle here, this came out of one set of cattle that I fed last spring. You look at what really drives the value there, it is pounds and quality. More than anything else, it's pounds and quality. We can kind of, in the feed yard, we can control end point. So fat, you don't see a lot of differences there. But muscling and marbling are things that are more genetically determined, of course. And weight, we have some influence, but of course cattle grow at different rates. So that's absolutely the recipe for high-value cattle, is pounds and quality. I never lost money feeding a prime steer or heifer. As a cattle feeder, I don't think I ever lost money on those cattle that graded prime, because there's so much extra value there. So the recipe really is pretty simple. If you want to create valuable cattle, the formula is cattle that are healthy. They go into the feed yard, they stay healthy, they grow, and they grade. It's really as simple as that. And you can wrap a lot of numbers around it, and I've shown you some, but that is the formula for cattle that will succeed on through the supply chain. They reward the feeder, they reward the packer, and they reward the consumer as well. So cattle that grow and grade are winners. Keep that in mind. Last couple minutes here, I want to just mention briefly about the Top Dollar Angus program. I really believe that the Angus breed, who has been leading the charge in terms of developing really valuable cattle, it's time to give those genetics a name. And that's why I'm starting the Top Dollar Angus program, launched just a couple of months ago, and already certified cattle in 3 different states. It's a commercial genetic certification program. You can think of it a little bit like Age and Source. We know what was certified in Age and Source, and there was a premium opportunity. What I'm doing is genetic certification. Genetic certification of cattle that are in the top 25% of the Angus breed for growth and carcass traits, what matters on down the supply chain to the feed yard and to the packer and consumer. Already have 1 million head of demand for those cattle. It's not hard to talk to cattle feeders and say, if I can bring you cattle that are certified to be in the top 25% of the Angus breed, will you pay a premium for them? It's not hard to convince them that they should or to get them to be willing to pay a premium, because they see extra value in those cattle. They see extra value there and that's why I already have 1 million head of demand. I built the demand side of this business first, and now it's a matter of going out and finding those cattle that qualify. Over time, more people probably orienting their programs that direction. It's not a top 5%, it's a top 25%, so there's room for a lot of different maternal traits and other things that are important at the ranch level. There's certainly room for some variation there, but if you want a real valuable calf crop and you have top 25% genetics, then we should be talking, because there is great demand for those cattle, and that's why I'm starting the Top Dollar Angus program. I don't think this will be the last. I think we'll see more genetic certification programs coming in our industry. This is just one of the first, and it is focused exclusively on high-end Angus cattle. So a couple things that I've learned about being an entrepreneur, just to kind of wrap this up. It does take a really good idea. Spend your money slowly and carefully, that's for sure. Takes a lot of patience. I heard this from somewhere, and it's a very good one. Learn to eat the word no for breakfast. You're going to hear a lot of no's when you try something new, and that's okay. Just go on and link up with like-minded people. And that's the other thing they never told me, I guess, when I became an entrepreneur, is I'd get to work with some people that really, truly have vision for the future. And there's been people that I have worked with that said, you know, I have been waiting for a program like this. I really have. I want to end by saying thank you from the outside looking in, as really a guy that spent most of his career in the cattle feeding business. I want to say thank you to the Angus breed. And I want to acknowledge what you've done in the business. You have paid attention and listened to the market. And because of that, I think you're being rewarded with a very large market share and unprecedented demand for your genetics, because you listened to the whole industry. And in my mind, Angus does win the award for the most entrepreneurial beef breed in the last 25 years. Thank you very much.